Hello, this is Jonathan Stark, your Dungeon Master, coming at you with a list today, just a ranking of all of the current releases of Dungeons & Dragons campaigns for 5th edition. This is part of my series, Adventurous Appetizers, little bite-sized audio pieces that you can listen to in your car on your way to work or at the gym or while doing dishes or just to drown somebody out for a good 20 minutes. Where this one today is going to be spoiler free, my point is to create just a ranking of the current campaigns that have been released so that dungeon masters or players who are interested in getting started or looking for a good campaign can just kind of have an idea of what to expect. Again, it's going to be spoiler free. I'm not going to point to specific moments in each campaign, but I will talk a little bit about what makes a campaign good or bad and what to expect when running that. Also, some of the work the DM might have to do. Lastly, this list will be in order from bottom to top. So, let's get started. The Cult of the Dragon leads the charge in an unholy campaign to bring Tiamat back to the Forgotten Realms. With the race against evil moving from Waterdeep to the sea of moving ice to Thay, the situation grows more perilous with each passing moment. So first up on the list, I'm going to be covering Horde of the Dragon Queen and the Rise of Tiamat, which is really one adventure that was split into two, rather cheaply actually. This was done, is the first thing that was released after, right after Dungeons & Dragons 5 came out and the starter kit had come out. And it kind of shows that they didn't even know all the rules yet. They didn't know all the monster stats yet. And so they just kind of put this together as best they could. The idea for the adventure is just classic fighting dragons. You are trying to stop dragons and a dragon cult from taking over the world. There's some interesting ideas for locations. There's a interesting idea for you to gather factions and have them all fight the dragons at the end. The problem with this one is that none of those ideas actually came to fruition. I just don't think the developers yet knew enough about their system to design a great adventure. So, I don't actually recommend this one. I have played it. You can have fun with it, but it requires a lot of work on the DM's part to rebalance things, to fix up some of the story, to add in some cooler mechanics. And it just doesn't, I don't think it pans out. There's the only reason to play this is for the setting and ideas, and I would just advise you to take those and do something better with them in your own campaign. Let's move on to number 2. When the shadows grow long in Waterdeep, and the fireplace in the tap room of the Yawning Portal dims to a deep crimson glow, adventurers from across the Forgotten Realms, and even from other D&D worlds, spin tales of dark dungeons and spread rumors of lost treasures. Our next book in the list is Tales from the Yawning Portal. This is actually a book that I like a lot. It gathers 7 dungeons from across D&D history and translates them into 5th edition. And the selection is excellent. Everything from the classic Tomb of Horrors all the way down to adventures that might be a little lesser known but really should be played, like Forge of Fury or Dead in Thay is an incredible adventure. These are just fun adventures. The reason it ranks low for me is I was a little disappointed in how they did their conversion. They did a very straight conversion. Just something like, oh, well, there's a gargoyle here. Well, we have stats for that. Throw in a gargoyle. They didn't really seek to address any of the issues of design. I mean, D&D has changed a lot since its early days, and the way we think of as what makes a good dungeon has changed a lot. And so there are dungeons in here that if you just pick this up and play, it will feel wrong, especially to newer players. It just doesn't take into account the years and years of game design through video games and RPGs that we've had to build on to create some of the newer adventures. So really cool ideas. I do think it is worth it to touch on some of these older adventures, but it just doesn't feel quite as polished as some of the other products, and that's because it is a conversion. All right, let's move on to number 3. The first signs are always small, bandits on the roads, pirates on the Dussarin River, monster sightings throughout the Summer Hills, all too close to the lands of civilized folk. All right, next up is Princes of the Apocalypse. This was a really turning point for D&D 5. It was the first adventure released after the sort of hideous rise of Tiamat and Horde of the Dragon Queen, and it turned D&D into a sandbox open world, which is really interesting. It's very difficult to run. And Princes of the Apocalypse is one of those campaigns that a lot of DMs have cut their teeth on and then felt like they failed. And that's okay because it isn't written in a way that's very accessible for a first-time DM or even just an unexperienced DM. I also take a lot of issue with the way it sets up the adventure. It doesn't have a good hook. And the players are really meant to just kind of wander around and figure out what's going on. And I never thought that was a good call to adventure in Dungeons and Dragons or any game, really. You want purpose right off the bat. You want to know who you're fighting and why, and be motivated by that. And in this one, it's really just a wander quest with the story coming together as you wander, which is cool that they were able to pull that off mechanically, but I've played it with groups and people always just feel a little bit bored. So going into this, what you can expect is a very cool environment. And I would say if you're going to run it, just get ready to build that story a little bit more, throw in those plot hooks that just aren't there initially. So get ready to do some work as a DM. Number 4. In the city of Waterdeep rests a tavern called the Yawning Portal, named after the gaping pit in its common room. At the bottom of this crumbling shaft is a labyrinthine dungeon shunned by all but the most daring adventurers. So now we're on to Waterdeep, Dungeon of the Mad Mage. This, in some ways, is actually my number 1 book, just because I'm so happy to finally have a full dungeon of Undermountain, or at least as big a dungeon as we're probably ever going to get. I'm also super, super excited to see a level 1 through 20 campaign. And Undermountain is literally my favorite dungeon of all time from the old D&D games. So this is just a special treat for me. And it's the first dungeon I ever played in Dungeons and Dragons with my dad. And we didn't play long because I was scared by a ghostly knight and literally had nightmares. But that's me at age 4 or 5. So there's that. I will say, the things I love about this are also what hold it back, because it is a mega dungeon, and mega dungeons by definition are they get a little stale after a while. This one does a fantastic job of keeping things fresh and interesting. I mean, the levels are all very different. It's some of the coolest ideas I've ever seen for a dungeon, but it's still a dungeon. There are individual little stories that go on, but not really a big overall plot. Ultimately, you have to ask yourself, why are we doing this? Why are we subjecting ourselves to this horrible dungeon crawl that's killing all of us slowly? But you won't not have fun with the individual moments. It just lacks any kind of really cohesive story. So what I recommend for this one is, if you're looking for a quick diversion into a dungeon, grab one of these dungeon ideas, reskin it for your own dungeon, or have the players fall into a portal that shoots them into a level of Undermountain that's appropriate for their party level, and just have fun with it from there, and don't worry too much about trying to play the entire mega dungeon unless your group has really agreed to do that from the start. Let's move on. Number 5. The Underdark is a subterranean wonderland, a vast and twisted labyrinth where fear reigns. It is the home of horrific monsters that have never seen the light of day. So we're talking Out of the Abyss for our next one. Out of the Abyss is fun because it is a rare Underdark adventure. We really don't get enough of those, and it does such a fantastic job of just creating the feel of these various races. They feel so alien, whether you're wandering through a mushroom city or a drow city or a city of dark gnomes. each one feels really unique and special. It is a difficult campaign to run, and you might be noticing a theme here that difficult campaigns tend to fall lower on my list just because, you know, as a DM, I know what it's like to run a session. And when you buy a campaign book, while they can be great to provide ideas for your own campaign, sometimes you do just want to pick them up and know how to run these cool scenarios. And Out of the Abyss has a lot of cool scenarios that it doesn't quite communicate how to run well. There's a lot of NPCs to keep track of, which is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. There's a lot of environments with that connect in kind of confusing ways. There's a lot of questions about what happens if a player goes here first or there first. But that said, the content is so good that it ranks this high on the list. Goblins, bugbears, maybe even a dragon or a drow will greet you as you take your first steps into the world of Faerun. All right, next up is the starter set, the Mines of Phandalin, and I really enjoy this campaign. It's call it a campaign is a little bit misleading. It's a short adventure. I think it ends at level 5, but it's such an amazing introduction to Dungeons and Dragons in general and D&D 5 in particular that I think it will go down as one of the best starter kits of all time. That is just because it feels so classic. It's got a lot of elements of new design in it, like there is a hub sandbox town. There's a lot of really interesting, quick little dungeons, but the variety and just the feel of the whole thing really lends itself to just feeling like you've jumped back into Dungeons and Dragons, which was welcome for a lot of people who didn't like 4th edition, which they felt really had deviated from the base formula of what D&D is. This is also a really, really easy adventure to run, and I recommend playing it for anybody, even if you've already played other adventures and are an experienced DM. Pick this up, find a group, run it, and afterwards maybe go on to your own material, or it easily leads into most of the other adventures, but really you don't want to miss this one. The only reason that I don't rank it higher is because it is so short. It is a starter adventure, and the story is, weak, but that's to be expected. It's really just meant to introduce people to the world of D&D. Under raging storm clouds, the vampire Count Strada von Zervik stands silhouetted against the ancient walls of Castle Ravenloft. Okay, now we're getting into the really interesting stuff. So Curse of Strahd is my next adventure that's up here. And wow, this is how a conversion should be done. This takes the classic Ravenloft adventure and just does it better. I mean, it takes everything that was awesome about that adventure and expands it into a whole gothic world. Every aspect of this is gonna just make your party feel cool. Whether they're fighting, vampires or werewolves or ghosts, they're gonna get a full dose of the undead. The thing that I think makes it most interesting is kind of the variable nature of it. So the gimmick here is that when you play this game, you kind of randomly pick what your treasure will be. I mean, the main goal of your quest, who your ally is and who you need to seek out. And this changes pretty much every game. So the cool thing about Curse of Strahd is that you should approach this as a DM not like Princes of the Apocalypse, where it's a whole sandbox world to run around in, but rather just grab all of that material that was set for the players, like what they ended up with as their random quest items, and just really focus on those. It'll be a smaller adventure, and but it'll be more tight for it, and you won't have to travel around the entire Gothic world. You really want to keep this focused on their quest. That's what makes this fun. The idea that there is more out there that they haven't seen, that there's a whole world operating underneath them. This isn't really much like most horror, you don't want to see behind every corner. It's what you don't see that's the scariest thing. And this can actually be a pretty scary campaign if you play it right. The only complaint I have about it is that it is very low level. It ends at level 10, and that feels really little for me for fighting a vampire like Strahd. I mean, you can beat him with the weapons you've given. You can kind of kick his ass, but it just that doesn't feel as epic to me as I think it should. By the time they travel through Barovia and defeat its dread lord, I just feel like I'd want the characters to be at least level 12, maybe 15, or even higher. And I think this was just before they were really doing any kind of long long-term campaigns maybe, and they just left it short. A death curse has befallen everyone who's been raised from the dead. Its victims are rotting away, and all efforts to reverse the decay have failed. All right, we're in the top 3 adventures for D&D right now, and leading that pack is Tomb of Annihilation. Tomb of Annihilation is a really fun and interesting romp through the jungle, and it feels like Indiana Jones in Dungeons and Dragons, complete with a final dungeon that is just really cool. Very hard, and that is a complaint some players do have about Tomb of Annihilation. I kind of don't sympathize. It's in the frickin' title, Tomb of Annihilation. So, if you get annihilated, you kind of knew what you were getting into. But it is a fair complaint, or at least warning, just to people who want to run this. If your group does not like character deaths, then you're going to have to do some adjusting here, because this is a tough campaign. I think it's fun to bring multiple characters in it, though, and play it like each group is discovering a little bit more about what's going on. Like a lot of the D&D 5 adventures, it does have a sandbox element that can either be, a love-hate relationship with that, because they can be hard to run. The story can get a little lost in the jungle, but that jungle is really fun to explore, and no matter where your group ends up, they're gonna have a blast. So, Tomb of Annihilation, definitely worth a check out. Famed explorer Volothamp Gadarm needs you to complete a simple quest. Thus begins a mad romp through the wards of Waterdeep, as you uncover a villainous plot involving some of the city's most influential figures. Okay, I'll admit, I was surprised by this one. My number 2 pick is Waterdeep Dragon Heist. I didn't expect to like this book very much. I dug the fact that they were doing a Waterdeep campaign, and that they were showing, off the city for the first time this full, kind of ever. I don't think we've ever gotten this full of a look at Waterdeep, and certainly not such a cool map of it. But the adventure I just felt was going to be a real throwaway, a lead-in to Undermountain, which I was more excited for. Turns out I was wrong. Waterdeep Dragon Heist has some of the best writing in the campaign sets, and it is so interesting the way that they decided to run it as kind of 4 different adventures. Pick your adventure out at the beginning, and it changes everything from there. The season, the villain, the dungeon you go to. But that's so cool. That's such a good idea. Kind of creates a choose your own adventure feel to this whole thing. And I'm just impressed that each of those 4 adventures was equally good, equally interesting, to the point where it would be hard for me to pick which one I'd want to go through as a DM. So kudos to them. That is an amazing product all around. While it's very short, I promise your group would love it. And it's an easy lead into your own material, because what they do in the campaign it actually tells you what the consequences are based on their actions, which is always cool. Or just because, now they have all these connections and NPCs to work with for your own material. Last up, ages ago, giants and dragons waged war across the savage frontier. These battles are long forgotten by the human civilizations of today, but ancient relics remain, and now the land shudders once more with the thunder of giant footsteps. All right, top of the list, best campaign written by Wizards of the Coast for D&D 5 so far is Storm King's Thunder. It just combines everything that I enjoy about all of the higher picks. It does have a sandbox world, but that world is focused a little bit by the missions the players choose to go on. They should not be seeing all of the world. And that's just a quick general note to DMs for these sandbox adventures. If you're trying to Skyrim this and get your players to see every corner of this world, you're doing it wrong. It won't be fun. Promise me that you will not do that. But in Storm King's Thunder, it kind of does show a DM how to run a sandbox game, which is incredible in of itself, because that's not an easy thing to learn to do, and it's a super good skill to have. But in addition to all of that, it does have a solid story, with really interesting characters, really nice sets of character choices you can make, battles that you can miss that are amazing, but you'll go to other battles which are just as equally amazing. You're just not going to open this book and not have a good time. And finally, they had written a book which really showed the DM, hey, here's a solid flowchart of events. Here's how to play this game. And even set the bar, I feel, for other authors. After this came out, you saw a lot of material on the DMs Guild suddenly change its format to be a lot more user-friendly. And a lot of those lessons were learned here. So great campaign all around, great story. You're going to have fun. If you like fighting giants, and who doesn't like fighting giants, then you should pick this up immediately, find a group, and run it. So that is my little appetizer for today. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you've arrived at work or finished your dishes or whatever else you're doing. But now I wish you farewell. May you savor your critical hits, learn from your critical failures, and above all, keep on rolling. Take care.